Welcome back, everybody. We are going to talk about social anxiety disorder today. This was a pretty popular topic, something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of our patients struggle with. Maybe something that might be cropping up also now, since people are not meeting new people, we're not putting ourselves in these situations, and some of us are kind of forgetting how to interact as well as we did before. And so maybe mild social anxiety, it might actually be on the increase right now. But in general, what social anxiety is an intense fear of certain social situations. Often this is meeting new people. Other kind of common scenarios are being in a new group, interacting in a social hierarchy. So this might be like interacting with an authority figure, talking to someone that you might want to date. And that's kind of a hierarchy because, they have a kind of this extra power of you really wanting to be with them and kind of maybe idealizing them. And sometimes it's other things like intense fear of public speaking, performance anxiety, even sometimes like going to like using a public bathroom, eating in front of people, those sorts of things. We're going to talk mostly, I think, about meeting new people, interacting with new people. And these things make a lot of people anxious. That's pretty common. Meeting new people can be nerve-wracking. Going on a date can be very nerve-wracking. What makes this unique is that people with social anxiety have a really, really intense fear of this. Or they avoid these situations because of this intense fear. And so they might not be like anxious every day and thinking about this every day, but it might be because they're avoiding the situations that would otherwise make them so anxious. We're going to talk about treatment. We are going to talk about different kind of profiles of what this can look like. And we're also going to interview my brother, Andrew, who has social anxiety disorder. And I was really surprised that he offered to come on the podcast because these sorts of things would normally make him very anxious. And so it was really cool to talk to him about this really for the first time. I knew that he had social anxiety disorder, but he's never really opened up before about it. So I was getting to know him along with you guys. We just did the interview, so we'll kind of show it out of sync. Okay, Kibby, what would you say about social anxiety disorder?
I love working with people with social anxiety disorder. So, I mean, for people listening, it's a really, it can really be treated with psychotherapy very, very well. So there's a lot of hope for people who have it. So like, shout out there. The way we understand social anxiety is just like this, as you said, this intense fear of being in social situations. And the way that it usually shows up is that people who have social anxiety are really afraid of doing something in the social interaction that's like a mistake or something that would be judged negatively, or not really carrying on the conversation, like showing that they're having like low social skills, right? Like messing up, or usually they're just afraid that interaction would lead to like a really big negative judgment about them. Like, oh, I'm so afraid of meeting someone new and stuttering over my words, and then that person thinking that I'm weird or dumb or don't know what to say or anything like that. So it's like this really hypervigilance for like making mistakes in social situations, at least what I've seen. And often what it looks like in the patients I've worked with is they anticipate a lot, like before they make a phone call to like order food sometimes, or before going to a party or doing an interview or speaking in class. There's a lot of anticipation. There's a lot of thinking about, oh my gosh, what if I look stupid? What if I mess up? A lot of preparatory work. Like some of my favorite patients with social anxiety like would write notes about what they would say in session before. So a lot of preparing what they would say. And a lot of different, what we call safety behavior, some ways to like prevent bad things from happening, like making sure that a lot of them drink, when they're in those kind of settings, or they only go to places that have people they know, and then often what happens after is that they have sometimes this is like self-doubt and anxiety afterwards, like doing a play-by-play of the interaction they just had. Oh my God, did I say something weird? Did I answer them correctly? Did I stand okay? And often sometimes what they're afraid of is that the signs of them being nervous come across. So they're afraid that other people can see that they're nervous and see that vulnerability. So voice shaking, pauses, losing their words, stuttering, all the things that show anxiety, they're afraid of other people seeing and judging them for that. So
one interesting aspect of social anxiety disorder that I've seen is that it can be pretty situational. And so the same anxiety in one domain might be totally absent in another. So as an example, someone might be very, very anxious about social situations out in the world, like meeting people at a bar or a party or at church or whatever. They might be really afraid to say no, to assert themselves. They might be really loath to kind of answer deep questions about themselves, but then when they're at work, this is very easy for them. Or they can suddenly public speak. They can do things that in a different domain would have totally terrified them, and vice versa. So some people might have a lot more anxiety at work, maybe because that's a certain type of authority figure or an authority situation or a place where they're less confident generally, and then be totally garrulous and fine out in the world.
Yeah, a lot of people with social anxiety have a lot of different coping mechanisms, right? They're able to put on a certain persona or function well, as you said, in certain domains of their life, but others, they're more nervous, or they hide themselves, like they don't show their vulnerability to people and things like that. So yeah, they could kind of craft their life to basically keep that hidden, and it's really hard for other people, especially like loved ones, to be able to see that.
I think this is really, really interesting in acting or actors. I've heard many actors actually have very extreme social anxiety disorder, but yet they're able to go on stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people. And the difference is just that when they're acting, they have a mask. They have a role that they're playing. They're confident within that role. And then as soon as that mask comes off, the costume comes off, it's a totally different story.
Yeah, I've heard that too, actually. A lot of actors have this social anxiety. And so they've actually been practicing all their lives to like create a persona that's not them. And that might be easier than if there's a negative judgment on however they're behaving in social settings or on stage. It doesn't say anything about their identity or their selfhood or worth, right? It has something to do with,
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of like once you put on so many different costumes, then you kind of maybe underdevelop wearing your own, like being yourself, because you're being other people all the time. And so you're kind of... atrophying in other ways.
And I think
I don't know what to talk about.
And I think that a really big emotion, and not only is it a fear of other people having negative judgments about them, there's a lot of anticipating and trying to prevent shame. That's something that really comes up a lot. They don't want, and shame is an emotion that is a social emotion that comes up when we're being rejected from a social group, being ostracized because of equality. So because of like a characteristic or something about their personhood, right? So what they're doing is trying to prevent being rejected for, these kind of negative judgments, and they think like, oh, they're dumb or they're weak or, anything like that. So the anxiety is almost kind of like anxiety about shame. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah. So what are different coping mechanisms you see frequently? And these coping mechanisms might not be healthy in the long term, but...
Yeah, I think that keeping in mind that with anxiety disorders, people have what's called safety behaviors, which is basically things that prevent the scary thing from happening. But in ways that, sometimes we think of it as a little bit of a crutch, like it's a little bit of like preventing the scary thing in a way that actually probably maintains anxiety. I'll give you an example, like people with anxiety disorder, social anxiety, let's say that again. People with social anxiety, as I said, often drink when they're at parties. So they don't even have to think about what the other person thinks or feels. They bring a friend, they avoid social situations, they, so there's all these different ways that they don't have to expose themselves to, or they become actors, right? They're not exposing themselves to the danger of like getting rejected for who they are. there's a lot of ways people can get to social anxiety. That's something that I've seen in my work with people, where I've had several different people say the same thing. I'm afraid of going to a party and meeting someone new, and I'm super anxious about it. Mm-hmm. Now, some people might be afraid of that because of trauma, because they've had some kind of abuse, they've had some kind of assault or sexual assault or something like that that makes them afraid of people. Mm-hmm. Or at least also has led to a belief of that they're lesser than, or they're shame. They should be ashamed of something, right? And if someone discovers it, they'll be rejected. So there's some people come to it through trauma. Some people come to it that they're just like, they're shy and they're hypervigilant kind of people. They're perfectionists. They want to do well and be seen as like a good person in all domains of their life. And so even in social situations are pretty complicated, right? There's like this dance of conversation, and they want to do it the best ever. And even just like a little mishap of stumbling over their words for them is like not being perfect. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that people can get to social anxiety. Or, there actually are some people who, they might actually have a social deficit. They might actually be, like maybe they might have traits of autism. They might be on the spectrum, right? Or they might have other difficulties in social situations that have gotten negative feedback, have gotten rejection. So they got a sense of there's something about them that they might get rejected for, but they're not sure what it is. So they have to kind of like be monitoring in all situations. So many different ways that people come to it.
I would think this comes into question with identity as well. Like, if you like homophobia, sexism, racism, transphobia, if people get used to hiding, if people get used to, other people telling them basically that who they are is unacceptable or strange or freakish or, whatever, then they learn to hide, and they learn to search for safety signals in other people. Like, is it okay to open up? How do I know it's okay to open up? Is this question going to lead to danger or to not being accepted? And so there are very reasonable ways that this develops.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that's what makes it, I think, kind of hard for people who are the loved ones of people with social anxiety. Because if you're really in the loved ones, if you're like in the zone of comfort level, sometimes people with social anxiety disorder will need a lot of reassurance, right? Like, was that okay? Did I come off as weird? And they need reassurance from the people who they're comfortable with, or they can't go anywhere or do anything without like a loved one with them. Like, I can't go to a party without you. And so there's a lot of those kind of reassurance behaviors there. But also for loved ones or like new people, that hiding behavior can be hard, because it's like that the person with social anxiety disorder might have a really difficult time opening up and being comfortable. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what's going on, right, if you don't know it's due to anxiety, that other person can feel rejected, right? Can feel like confused or rejected.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of especially sad part of this disorder, is that it can be a feedback loop. The thing you're afraid of happens because you're spending so much time being self-conscious that you're not behaving naturally. Or you might give signals to another person that you'll reject them, or that they shouldn't feel comfortable talking to you. And then that can exacerbate the symptoms. So what's treatment look like?
Yeah, I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy has been fantastic for social anxiety disorder, and it's also a lot of fun for therapists. And if someone's already being brave enough to show up to a therapist's office, right, talking to a stranger about their innermost secrets, it's already like a really good sign. But with anxiety disorders in general, it's the same principle. This principle of exposure is a really big part of it. That's the behavioral part. And exposure is basically facing and being exposed to the thing that the person's most afraid of over and over again until it doesn't become as scary anymore. So what happens is that when someone comes in for treatment, we kind of figure out what they're scared of. Like, when you go to a party and you're terrified to go, what is the thing that you're most afraid of happening? They might say, I'm going to stumble over my words and people are going to think I'm really dumb. So what part of that treatment is basically intentionally doing that, intentionally stumbling over words, intentionally going to parties, right? And doing that over and over again so that that person, first of all, feels agency over the thing that they're scared, like facing your fears, right? That's the principle. It's like feeling a sense of control, that they're intentionally going and doing something that they're scared of, not avoiding, but actually approaching it. So that's the behavioral part, like actually exposing themselves to the situations that scare them. I've had so many fun therapy sessions where the fear is like awkward pauses, meeting someone new. So what we'll do is I'll bring in a friend to come into our session, and then the assignment is that they're going to have a conversation, but my patient would have to do the awkward pause. And they'll do it, and there's they're feeling anxious the whole time. But then after, the cognitive part is kind of, it's really paying attention to what actually happened. Like, what is the difference between that person's fear, the expectations of what would happen, and the actual outcome? So I think that's a really important part of treating interpersonal problems in general. We have a tendency to try to guess what other people are thinking and feeling. We do this thing called mind reading, right? Where we leave saying, oh, that person thinks I'm really dumb, without ever actually asking them. So actually people with social anxiety tend to not even be afraid of something that they're not even checking up on, or not even basing it in actual data and actual feedback. So in those sessions, I'll say, okay, what were you afraid of? I'm afraid that person would think I'm dumb. And then we'll ask my friend who came in, what did you think of this person during that awkward pause? And usually it's a lot less bad than what they think, right? Because the terror, the social anxiety, the anxiety is so intense, it's like, oh, this is something horrible is going to happen. But usually the person says, oh, yeah, that was awkward, but it was fine. So it's really getting like that actual feedback and actual checking in on how that actually went, so that the person learns, when I expose myself and approach situations that I'm scared of, the really catastrophic, awful outcome, the shame that I'm afraid of, that doesn't actually happen as much as I think it does. Or if it does happen, then we figure out how to fix it. Oh, does that person, did you really give off a bad impression? Okay, let's figure out how to do things a little differently and start to learn social skills. So
yeah. So part one, kind of exposure. Part two, if there's actually something to work on, then social skills training.
Yeah, it's like part one, I mean, it's all the same kind of part, but it's basically approaching situations that are feared, which is an all anxiety treatment. And then the cognitive part is really learning the difference between your expectations and your unhelpful thoughts and expectations about it, and then what actually comes out, right? So if you think that people are going to think that you're dumb because you stuttered over your words, well, then we're going to expose them over and over to that situation, and then really figure out if that's true.
Okay. Well, we'll go over into the interview now. I think it was a really great kind of classic example of social anxiety disorder. Brought up a lot of the things we've just mentioned, and I think we can continue the discussion and refer back to what he says and his experiences. So I'll hand it over to the interview now. Okay, so I was really excited. Actually, my brother Andrew has social anxiety disorder and offered to come on the podcast and talk about it, which really surprised me. But I'm really, really grateful that he is coming on to talk about his experience. I'm going to learn a lot because I don't think he's ever really talked to me about it too much. So Andrew, welcome, and thanks so much for coming on.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Part of the reason maybe I was so surprised that you offered to come on was because you can be kind of shy about this sort of thing. So what's it been like for you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think you probably caught me at a rare moment. Once I made that promise, I'm kind of stuck with it. So, it's not something I really talk much about with anyone, friends, family. I even with a therapist, I've never really delved into any psychotherapy or anything like that. It's all just been kind of, medications that have helped here and there. I find that as I get older, I'm 37 now, it becomes easier to manage. I think primarily just because I think in general, the older people get, the less they care about other people's opinions. And I think I'm kind of at that stage in life where I'm getting more comfortable with who I am, and if you don't like me, then that's okay. But it was really high school, college were probably the toughest years. Actually, probably going back to all the way back in grade school. When the opinions of others matter most, and you're constantly terrified about, what does this person think of me? Oh, did I make a fool of myself? Are they talking behind my back right now? That kind of thing. That's something that's kind of always in your head after interactions.
At its worst, when it was maybe in high school and college, tell us more, like maybe like an example of a situation that would be like, oh, this is the worst. And like, what did it feel like? What did you do?
So it's mostly, it's hardest for me when I'm, meeting strangers, someone that I've never met before. I think that's common of anyone, regardless of, social anxiety or not.
Well, sorry to make you talk to a stranger. Me. You're already facing your fears, so this is good.
I guess it's for me it was always if I had a friend with me, someone that I was comfortable with. It takes me a while, I guess. Backtracking, it takes me a while to build a friendship to where I'm truly comfortable with that person, and I'm not afraid to be myself or say what I want. And But getting back to the example of meeting you for the first time, knowing that Jacqueline is here with me, she can vouch for me. If I make a fool of myself in front of you, I trust her that she would tell you, oh, he's actually a really good guy. That kind of thing. That makes it easier for me in situations like this if I'm with someone that I'm comfortable with. I was, obviously in high school and college, you go to a lot of parties and stuff, and, you're with your core group of friends. So that was never, yes, you're around a bunch of people you don't know, but as long as I kind of had my, one or two or three good friends with me, those situations were always easier. It was really those one-on-one type things where it was, quite difficult. And, I would kind of freeze up, and conversations were very hard for me to initiate. I don't know if I could give you one particular example in general, but just, situations where you're kind of meeting someone for the first time, kind of expected to carry on a conversation. Those are always the toughest for me.
What would be your worst nightmare? When you say making a fool of yourself, what in your mind was like, oh, please let's not let this happen?
Well, I was always terrified mostly of just not knowing, of not saying anything. It wasn't so much of maybe saying something stupid, but just not being able to. I hate the idea of meeting someone and then the conversation just stalling. And you're just there sitting in that awkward silence. And that to me was the most terrifying thing. One example I guess I could give you, and this is more recent than not actually, as I just told you, it's been getting easier as the older I get, but, I was a dining room manager for about 6 years. And, a big part of the job is being a schmoozer and go, touching tables and talking to people that you've never met before, asking how things are going. And to me, that was incredibly scary because, you go up to a table and the extent of my, after I asked how the food was and how everyone was enjoying themselves, then I didn't know what to say. And I didn't know how to gracefully exit the situation. So, the idea of, I guess, in my mind, I would go to a table and be like, okay, well, what happens if I go up there, I start talking and they just don't really respond? and there's this awkward silence. Did I just make a fool of myself? Did I just hinder their dining experience? Are they gonna, call the other manager over and be like, who is this weirdo that we were just talking to? Those kinds of things, I guess.
Do you have any idea where this came from? Was it like anything about our family, or was there a memory of being little and something terrible happening, or have you just always felt this way?
Um, I don't, honestly, I don't know. It's interesting. Part of the appeal of doing this podcast was was actually learning a little bit more about the disorder, and having to think about kind of my own experiences with it. And because I've never really sat down and thought much about it or read much about it, and like I said, I've never really had any therapy. So, um, it's hard for me to answer that. I know that it's also hard for me to distinguish, social anxiety from just being shy or being, an introvert. I was always a very shy kid, very, very shy. I remember, I was kind of joined at my mom's hip as a kid, and I just hated, I remember our parents' friends coming up and trying to talk to me and be playful, and I would just hide behind mom, and I just wanted nothing to do with them. There's some kids that love that attention. I always ran from it, and I guess my earliest memory would be my first day of preschool, um, and I remember, leaving my mom's side for the first time. I remember this large gate, and I kind of think of it today as like the gates of hell. And I remember just crying and crying as my mom made me go through that gate to this world, this unknown world, with a bunch of strangers and kids I've never met before, and just somehow expected to be happy and fit in. And it was just a terrifying. I still remember that morning. I don't know. I mean, I must have been 4 years old, or maybe, yeah, probably 4.5. But that was very terrifying for me. Maybe that was so traumatic that it carried with me. I don't know.
It's always been so odd that you had social anxiety disorder, because I always thought of you as the most socially competent member of our family. You always seemed relatively popular in high school, dated pretty girls, you were the restaurant manager, and always kind of the cool one of the family. So it was always so strange that on the one hand you're shy and anxious and, beating yourself up for any perceived flaw in conversation. On the other hand, we all sort of thought of you as the cool one.
Well, now you know the truth. I don't. I think that I've always tried to control it or overcome it by putting myself in situations that I'm uncomfortable with. I think that's, kind of the only way to overcome it, and so it's odd, and I've always hated, been terrified of public speaking, a terrible stage fright, but yet I've put myself time and time again in situations where I was the president of a fraternity in college, and president of a boxing club in college, and like you said, a dining up front of the house manager where you're expected to be around people to talk to people. And so I don't know if I've been able to hide it relatively well or camouflage it, or maybe be someone that, maybe I'm not truly being myself. I'm being something that I think people want me to be, or I don't know exactly. But yeah, it's always been a part of my life.
But that's great that would be the treatment of itself. So you're like basically treating yourself and moving past it on your own, where putting yourself in those scary situations, right? Like having to talk to a lot of people and putting yourself out there, doing that over and over. I mean, at least it sounded like it was a way for you to, live a full life, even when, you're feeling this much anxiety around that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the more, you know, the more, you put yourself in front of people and you realize that, oh, well, looking back at the end of the night, oh, nothing went terribly wrong. People seem to enjoy talking with me, and I really don't think I made a fool of myself. The more, I guess, of those experiences that you can draw from and help kind of boost your confidence going forward. So I think that's helped.
Do you feel like it's held you back from anything in your life? Like anything that you would avoid? I mean, that's part of what would make it a disorder is when people, don't go to certain party or don't put themselves in certain situations, don't date, like don't travel or take certain jobs or stuff like that where they
Sure.
avoid those situations. For you, is there anything that you did to help back or?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've missed out on a lot of opportunities to meet people. Yeah. I mean, I've put myself in, situations where I'm around people, where it would have been easier to, and I would have been more comfortable just staying home. But, that being said, I think that my fear of conversations in general, um, I've missed out on really getting to know people. I think some of it's just kind of superficial talk, small talk, enough talk to get by to make it look like I'm being social, to make it look like I'm not the odd guy in the back of the room. But I think I've definitely missed out on. I don't have a very large group of friends. I have a small group of friends, which I'm comfortable with and I love. But I think that it's definitely, kept me from certain relationships, meeting, certain people, more people, um, getting to know people on a higher level. Um, I know that I think dating's hard for everyone in high school, but I mean, I really didn't have um, a girlfriend until I was a senior. Um, just because the idea of being, alone with someone, you don't just really have your friends to help build you up and lift you up. It's that one on one, and that again going back to that idea of conversations. Oh, what do I say? And I think I kind of, you know, strayed away from that for high school. It's not that big of a deal, but for several years. Um, but yeah, I think just in general, it's I think it's just in general with meeting people and really truly getting to know someone.
It's interesting, too, to hear what the fear is. I've heard this from a number of people that I work with social anxiety, where it's this fear of not doing the conversation dance correctly and then having that 2-second awkward pause or whatever lead to a huge negative judgment on the other person's part. Like, oh, there was a pause, an awkward pause, that person's a weirdo, right? That's the fear. And it's interesting that having that other person, like Jacqueline here, or like a friend, to say, no, that even though there was that awkward pause, this guy's great, right? To like counteract that fear.
Or even if, they're with, we're at a party and, she's introducing me to a new person, one of her friends, I might pause, but then I would know she's right there to jump in and help that, continue that conversation.
Gotcha.
So that's extremely helpful. It's always, I'm much better at talking to people if they are, very talkative. And, if I get a good response from someone immediately, then I'm okay. It's those, meeting someone in the very beginning, you don't kind of get the response you want or you anticipated it, and then your head's kind of going in the back of your head. Oh no, did I say something stupid? Is she not interested? Is he not interested? But if you get that some kind of reassurance from the get-go, then I'm kind of okay and I can continue. And obviously, it depends on the if we're talking about something that I know a lot about or I'm interested in, the other person is interested, then it flows very naturally. But yeah, I think for me it's always been that the biggest fear is just what happens when the conversation stops? And that is just something that I always think about, and I guess, at times try to avoid. It's easier for me to just not go there, and then, you look back on it, well, what if I had gone there? I may have met this incredible person. Maybe it would have been a great, friendship or a business contact, or,
How would you, so you've mentioned some ways that friends can help you feel more comfortable in the moment, although those are maybe ways that allow you to kind of keep avoiding things like being there, while you meet a new person, or picking up the awkward pause and continuing the conversation. Like those are really helpful ways to make you feel more comfortable in the moment. Do you wish that people would, like, are there any other things that you think friends and family could do to help? Like, do you wish that they would drag you out when you don't want to go out more so that you aren't able to avoid situations? I mean, you do always date very extroverted women, which is kind of funny. I don't know if that's because then they pick up the...
I think that's probably part of it, right? Because they're more talkative, and they do, I think that's probably why, if you have two introverts in the room, and then you're kind of in trouble, unless you're both comfortable just not talking to each other and, staring through each other. I think that, I think it's always good for someone to kind of push you out of your comfort zone. I don't know how else. I think, just in general understanding. One of the problems that I've or one of the critiques I've gotten from people is that, or people that I've just met for the first time, they'll think that I'm kind of standoffish, or maybe even arrogant, or just not interested, or too cool to talk to them. But in reality, it's just, no, it's not any of that. I'm just kind of scared, nervous to talk to you. And so I think just maybe, friends and then maybe they'll go to a friend of mine and be like, oh, that Andrew guy, he was, is he kind of a jerk? But just them kind of understanding, no, like, that's, he's just kind of shy, he's got some, I'm saying social anxiety or whatever, but just to kind of explain that, no, he's just kind of shy around people. He's actually a really, really nice guy. I think that's the biggest, misconception that I've had along the ways.
That's so interesting, because first of all, for listeners, it might be nice to hear that the people who, might seem just cool and popular and standoffish are actually probably very nervous. So that's, that's a nice thing to hear. But it's interesting the kind of, I'll say, the power balance. Like when you go into conversation and there's a lull or an awkwardness in the conversation, you're nervous that it's going to be your fault, right? It's going to be like, oh, I'm not, they're going to think I'm weird or not good at conversation. So you're almost like the one who's shy, hoping that person likes you. But actually, it's like the reverse. The other person thinks, oh, he's too cool for me, right? He's not talking to me because he's too cool. Maybe, so actually, they think that you are the one who's like more socially competent, and they're like, oh, nervous around you.
Yeah, I'm sure that's happened before. I don't think that's what everyone thinks when they talk to me, but there have been times where I've gotten that kind of feedback, or I've heard from friends that their friends who who I hadn't met before think that had that impression of me. So yeah, and I think going into that conversation, being nervous or scared of that pause, that awkward pause, you kind of go in there, somewhat of a handicap, obviously, and it kind of hinders your ability to just be yourself and be natural and let the conversation flow naturally.
Okay, so Andrew, if you had any advice you could give to people with social anxiety disorder, what would you say?
I would say to really try to understand it better than I did. I think was probably, I guess, officially diagnosed with it when I was in high high school, sometime in high school. But like I said, I've never gone for therapy. I've never really read up much about it, and I would just try to get, try to learn as much about it as you can, and probably be a lot easier to overcome if you if you do that rather than trying to kind of do it your own way. I would say listen to the professionals, and I think I've always been, I guess, probably too nervous to seek therapy, too bullheaded to think that it would do any good, and it's probably just because I'm afraid to open up in front of a stranger like that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend really trying to learn as much as possible about it.
Would you have any advice for the loved ones of people struggling with social anxiety disorder, like the friends, family? They have their shy loved one, and what would you recommend for them to do to support them? Or
I would I guess the same thing I would advise for those with the disorders to learn as much about it as you can, so that you can really kind of get in their shoes, and kind of get a better understanding of kind of what they go through, and why they do certain things or make certain decisions, and I think that would ultimately make it easier to kind of be there for them and help them out.
Perfect. Well, that was a good plug for our profession, Andrew, so thank you. And and now one for yours. So Andrew actually has an incredible potato chip company called Low Country Kettle. It's my favorite potato chips, and I'm not just saying that. Everybody who's tried them absolutely loves them.
Well, thank
Andrew,
you.
is there anything you want to say about them?
Yeah, so we are, again, I started this company with a good friend of mine about 4.5 years ago now, and we're actually the first potato chip company in South Carolina, and still going strong today. So all of our flavors are kind of southern, low country inspired. You can find us on our website, free shipping, lowcountrykettle.com. You can find us in Whole Foods throughout the Southeast. And yeah, give them a try. I promise they will not disappoint.
What's your favorite flavor?
Oddly enough, mine is probably the Bloody Mary.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Mine's Carolina Reaper.
We just released a Carolina Reaper, so that's also really, really good. It's I think some people are a little scared to try it. They're thinking it's going to burn their face off, but it's really more of an approachable heat, and it's a really well balanced chip. So. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrew. I hope this was okay for you. And it really was actually valuable hearing an account. I think it is pretty classic and will be really helpful for people to hear and relate to.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep. I will see you soon, I hope.
Alrighty. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. So, that interview was great, and I'm really appreciative that he came on to do that, and it's funny because as a stranger who just met him, I wouldn't be able to tell. I couldn't tell that he was anxious at all or even nervous. He seemed really confident. He was nice and chatty, and so yeah, it's funny how different it must feel on the inside for people with social anxiety than how it looks on the outside.
It's funny because when when we were talking to him yesterday about doing this, he was giving all sorts of disclaimers about how he was going to sound stupid and he wasn't going to answer the questions right and to not expect greatness and all of these things. And then he came on and did a great job. But yeah, a lot of like really, like a lot of the component parts of social anxiety disorder came out. He's talking about the safety behaviors of having his close group of friends with him, in order to prevent lulls in conversation, to pick them up whenever he feels like he's flagging. He talked about being, at the end of the day, actually being perceived as maybe standoffish or disinterested, or too cool, when in reality, inside he was feeling really nervous and anxious, and that was really interesting for me to learn, because I always thought of him as kind of cool and too cool for me in certain instances, and I always worried a lot about like what he thought about me, And so yeah, that was pretty illuminating.
It always reminds me of how people who are afraid and really afraid of rejection tend to come across as rejecting. And actually, that's the thing that may get negative feedback from the world, right? They like, if they get signs that that person doesn't like them, they don't know why. Ironically, as like you said, the feedback loop.
Yeah, I also, I mean, it's interesting that it's like he's afraid of meeting new people, but then there's also a fear of really opening up. And I've seen that as well with patients. And I don't, is that a typical part of social anxiety disorder? The fear to get deep, to really be known by the other person?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as we were talking about before, people with social anxiety who are functional, they tend to, have their personas, right? They tend to hide parts of themselves. They tend to not be spontaneous and authentic in conversations. That's something that comes, they have to think about it. They craft their image. And in therapy, I've had, people come in with social anxiety, and most of the time they come in because it blocks them from a certain aspect of their life, right? They can't make friends. They're lonely. They don't go to parties, and they can't apply to jobs. But then it might take them a long time to even open up. I've talked to some patients who barely spoke a word in the first couple sessions, or act in a certain way to make themselves likable to me, but then would hide like how anxious they actually were. Yeah. So that's a really normal part of social anxiety, and it's hard for the other person to kind of see that and be let in to that inner experience.
Yeah, I will say I feel like over my life I've spent a lot of time trying to gain my brother's approval and attention. So it's just funny because maybe some of this is explained by his own kind of reticence, and he's probably gonna listen to me like, yeah, right, good try, but and it's the shame piece is interesting as well, because there are some cases where maybe people just are more sensitive to shame, but other times, and this is what I was mentioning before, your community may have instilled this sense of shame in you. If you are gay and growing up in the conservative South, you've gotten used to feeling like there's something wrong with you, or that you need to hide who you are, that it won't be safe to show who you are. If you're transgender, I mean, it's very likely to feel that way. If you're a minority of any sort living in a different dominant culture than the lessons you've heard about the food that you eat, or your accent, or the way you look, or whatever, it could be like, oh no, you're different and weird. And so once that's instilled enough, then that kind of becomes, the modus operandi, like over time.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of how social anxiety really, it develops from a place that's real. That's like, that's they're being hypervigilant and watching out for threats that are actually there, that they're at risk of showing a part of themselves that might get rejected from that community. I think that it becomes a problem when they start to feel that kind of anxiety in all social situations, even with people who might be more accepting. So I think with any kind of disorder, it's like it comes from a place, and it's developed in a situation that help that person survive, help that person cope. And then they go into new situations where that fear or whatever, it doesn't really apply there, because they're not in danger anymore and they still feel that fear. So
yeah. I mean, even if you go back into your dominant culture, or if you're in a space where you're really accepted, it can still be you're just so practiced in hiding yourself or in being cautious that it's too difficult at first to open up. Okay, so Kibbe, what can loved ones do to help someone with social anxiety disorder? Yeah,
it's tricky because loved ones, like really close friends, that's kind of like interesting, like really close friends of these people who are very anxious, they think they might be helping. They're helping in the short term by reassuring them, maybe picking up on the conversation, basically blocking them from their fear, right? Like to kind of, as kind of a safety behavior, right? Mm-hmm. But actually that helps in the short term, but might not help in the long term. So, I mean, in the long term, of course, referring your loved one to cognitive behavioral therapy treatments for social anxiety. That's like, as we always say, that's like the main thing. What they can do also is try not to actually reassure, or try not to actually like be the safety behavior. Like even just letting them have that conversation and letting them have that pause and letting them face their fears. And then afterwards saying, like, how did it go? Did it, it's the same kind of principles as the treatment. Like, how did it go? Did it go as badly as you thought? Oh, wow. The past couple times that you've put yourself in that situation, it didn't go as badly as you thought. They didn't think negatively of you, right? So actually helping these people approach these scary situations, knowing that the more they do it, the more comfortable they're going to be. And without the safety behaviors of like drinking or drugs or something else that would help them feel better in the moment, but still let that fear happen.
That second part is important, because what I wouldn't want to do is like go to a party with Andrew and just leave him out to dry, and then he's likely to have a pretty bad experience, because even if nothing horrible happens, if there's a lull in the conversation, if he's just like sitting there ruminating about it and thinking that was so terrible, like then he could perceive that as a bad situation or a bad experience and then not want to do it again. So you want to be careful to help maybe them process it afterwards.
And also, tell them what you're doing, right? So you don't surprise them with it. But maybe learn a little bit about social anxiety together, and then kind of make an agreement together that you're going to work on it together and support them, and tell them that you love them, right? That you're there for them and you care and support them and want to help them with it, right? You don't just leave them at a party and say, good luck. But no, just like with a little bit of understanding that this might be a way to support them better in the long term. Another funny thing, actually, I thought about this while we were doing the interview with him. Sometimes with therapists, when they treat social anxiety disorder, like the patient will be so afraid of showing signs of anxiety or signs that might be judged, that often we will record or videotape interactions with like strangers, like have a stranger come in, have a conversation and record it, and then review it with the patient after. Because as we said, that there's such a difference between how they feel inside and the way that they present outside. Sometimes it's huge for the patient to see like, oh, I did pause or stutter over my words, but I don't look that dumb, or the person didn't, judge me for that. Or so the expectation and the reality are always so different that sometimes even just showing the recording could be helpful. So we can always show Andrew the recording. You can listen to the podcast after, maybe that'll help.
So in terms of other possible negative effects, I wanted to get your opinion on whether you think this is classically social anxiety disorder or whether this is something else. It seems like there is this external focus, or there's like this greater importance given to the other person in the conversation, and that could have pretty negative consequences, like not setting boundaries well enough, going along with whatever their plans are, or even in relationships, maybe, spending so much time focusing on winning the person over that you don't actually check in with yourself. And then you get into this relationship and suddenly you're like, wait a minute, maybe I don't feel the way I thought I felt because I didn't even check in with myself. Like, does that happen a lot in social anxiety disorder?
That's a really good point. The external focus it's a huge component. And a lot of the cognitive part is trying to help that person start to, clue into their own feelings and needs in those moments, right? Like, like kind of what I said to Andrew is like in those conversations, if there's an awkwardness, people with social anxiety it's kind of like a low self-esteem kind of feeling where they're going to attribute the problem to themselves and say like, I'm not doing well, and how do I make that person like me? Instead of vice versa, like, oh, this is a weird conversation and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with this person, right? So part of it is the shift from externally focused on pleasing other people that might lead them to do things to, like to over people please, like be in therapy and not say their truth, but only, want to come across as likable, right? So, shift away from that and try to prioritize their own needs and feelings and their own opinions about those situations. And another part of that external focus is it's interesting to also hear that Andrew's social anxiety he mentioned that it kind of appeared in, it's interesting that Andrew was talking about how his social anxiety was the strongest in high school. around the time that's a really normal time to really feel self-conscious, right? And the fallacy there, the mistake that people make at that age is a spotlight effect, where they think that everyone is focused on what they are doing or how they're presenting, right? So if you leave a conversation and think, oh, they think I'm this, they think I'm that, they probably heard my shaky voice and think badly of me. Well, that's actually, that's actually misattributing how much people actually think about you, right? Like people often are very self-focused and you forget about that. So people are worrying about that other people judging them in social anxiety, but often the truth is that people are mostly thinking about themselves and how they came across. So the external focus doesn't even make any sense, because it's like this thought that everyone just, is just thinking badly of you all the time, or waiting to think badly of you, or honestly, they're probably thinking of like what chips are they going to eat at the party. Right? So
Low Country Kettle would be the answer.
Exactly. There you go. So yeah, a lot of even the treatment of it is trying to adjust that person's thoughts so that they realize that what they're expecting is not going to happen as much as they think. Like they're not going to be judged as negatively as they think they are. To not mind read, to just really like actually get feedback from people about how they're coming across, and to shift it from an external to internal focus. Like, okay, do I like this person? Was that a good conversation for me?
Yeah.
Things like that.
How would you open a conversation with a loved one who you suspect might have social anxiety? Because you might not be able, it might be really difficult to tell. And if it's difficult for them to open up, it's like, okay, well then how can we get them to open up, I guess?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people probably have social anxiety and are not aware of it. So, because as we said, feeling anxious approaching a new social situation or a party where you don't know anyone, or speaking in public, that's scary for everybody.
Yeah.
But people with social anxiety have this much intensity of anxiety. They might not even be aware that they're more afraid than other people, right? So for loved ones, if you notice that your loved one is starting to find ways to avoid situations, so like they're just not coming to parties with you, they're not like they won't meet someone new unless under very specific conditions, they got to drink or do other kind of drugs in order to be in those situations, or they're just closing down their life in some way, like not applying to certain jobs, or not, like they're just closing down in ways that for them, that it might like block off a life that's very meaningful to them, right? Then you might have a conversation with them. You might ask them, hey, why is it that you didn't want to go to that party with me? What's going on there? What do you think that the holdup was for you? What do you think would have made you feel more comfortable? Is this a problem that's, always going on, or is this in certain situations, or just like asking them about it and listening for that anxiety, that fear of judgment, that fear of shame.
I think if I were in that situation with someone, we just had that conversation, and it's like, what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? They would probably bring up the safety behaviors, and then I would probably do them, like, to get. And I feel so. Is that okay? Like, if it's a first step of like, how do I get this person more comfortable at a social event? Can you kind of make them comfortable? Provide those safety behaviors, and then work to pare those down later.
Yeah, and having an honest conversation about the pros and cons of it, right? Like, and it's also what your goal is. If you just want your loved one to come with you to that Christmas party, yeah, like you might have to accompany them, make them feel comfortable, But if it's about like, oh, that person has a is really suffering and really limiting their life, and they need long-term treatment, they really need long-term help, then working with a therapist and maybe figuring out what things to do or not do to support their long-term reduction of that anxiety. So these safety behaviors of like carrying on the conversation for them might reduce their anxiety in the short term, but ultimately, it's a different conversation instead of a different plan when it comes to treating it long term.
Awesome. Well, thank you to my brother Andrew for being a guest and doing a wonderful job, and Kibby's got some resources for all of us, so I'll let her close out the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to read online about it. Lots of books. I think the most helpful one that I found for people struggling with social anxiety and loved ones who would just want to understand it better and how to treat it. It's a Treatments That Work series. So books that are kind of like workbooks and manuals for CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for disorders. But the series is called Treatments That Work, and the name of the book is called Managing Social Anxiety, a Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Approach. It's the workbook version, and it's written by Deborah Hope, Richard Heinberg, and Cynthia Turk. You can find it on Amazon. They really break it down in really accessible ways, what social anxiety is and how to help yourself, how to work with a therapist on treating it long term. So I really recommend that book.
Perfect. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please rate, review, and subscribe. That helps us so much. It gives us a lot of legitimacy. And your testimonials are amazing to read. And we love seeing them. So please rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Bye. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval.